Welcome to Chasing Curiosity TV. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more updates. November 24th, 1992, Subic Bay, once the US Navy's Pacific stronghold, watched the last American warship depart. The stars and stripes came down, the Philippine flag went up, a moment of national pride, but also deep uncertainty. With the Americans gone, the region's security umbrella vanished overnight. The 7th Fleet's deterrence was history. The gate was left unguarded. In Beijing, leaders saw opportunity, not crisis. The South China Sea, vital, resource-rich and strategic, was suddenly open. The US exit reset the chessboard and China was ready to move. This quiet shift, marked only by a flag lowering, fundamentally altered Asia's balance of power. The Philippines, newly independent, now faced a powerful, ambitious neighbor alone. The vacuum at Subic Bay would not last. A new power was poised to fill it. Subtly at first, then with growing boldness. The stage was set for a defining struggle of the 21st century. The Pacific's calm was only the surface. Beneath, a storm was brewing. After the US left, China advanced with patience and precision. No invasions, just small, calculated steps. In 1995, China occupied Mischief Reef, building fishermen's shelters that were really military outposts. The Philippines protested, but with a weak navy and no US backup, the world barely noticed. This became China's blueprint. Occupy a reef, build structures, expand and militarize, always just below the threshold of open conflict. The 9-dash line, a sweeping U-shape on Chinese maps, claimed nearly the entire South China Sea, overlapping the zones of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei and Taiwan. China's slow advance turned a line on a map into hard reality: artificial islands, runways, missile sites. By the early 2010s, China had a network of outposts, unsinkable aircraft carriers across the Spratlys. Their Coast Guard and maritime militia harassed neighbors, blocked fishing and asserted control. The Philippines, on the front line, felt the pressure most. The dragon's slow creep had become a relentless march. The world was waking up, but China was already entrenched. The balance of power was shifting, one reef at a time. The South China Sea was no longer just water, it was a battleground. For Masinloque's fishermen, the sea was life, until 2012, when China seized Scarborough Shoal. Chinese Coast Guard ships blocked Filipino boats, sometimes ramming or blasting them with water cannons. The message? This was now China's territory. Generations of fishermen lost their richest grounds overnight, plunging families into poverty. Forced to fish closer to shore, their catch dwindled, debts mounted. Many abandoned the sea for odd jobs, their pride and heritage shattered. The psychological toll was immense: humiliation, fear, and a sense of abandonment. The empty nets became a national symbol of injustice. The fishermen's plight put a human face on China's aggression. Their struggle galvanized public anger and a demand for action. This was no longer just a territorial dispute, it was a fight for dignity and survival. The sea that once sustained them had become a source of fear. The nation could no longer ignore their story. 2012 marked a turning point. China's salami slicing became outright seizure. When Philippine forces tried to stop Chinese poachers at Scarborough Shoal, Chinese ships intervened, sparking a tense standoff. A US brokered deal called for both sides to withdraw, but only the Philippines complied. China stayed, reinforced, and blockaded the lagoon. Scarborough Shoal, just 124 nautical miles from Luzon, was lost without a shot fired. The humiliation was profound, a home invasion in broad daylight. Protests erupted, outrage swept the nation. China's willingness to use power, not just words, was now undeniable. The Philippines Navy was outmatched, diplomacy ignored. With no military options, Manila turned to a new battlefield: international law. The loss forced a strategic rethink. The fight was moving from the sea to the courtroom. Blocked at sea, the Philippines, under President Aquino, took China to court invoking UNCLOS S. The case at The Hague wasn't about ownership, but about rights and the validity of China's 9-dash line. China refused to participate, calling the process a farce, and launched a global propaganda campaign. Despite the boycott, the tribunal pressed on. In July 2016, the verdict was clear. China's 9-dash line had no legal basis. Scarborough and Mischief Reef were within the Philippines' exclusive zone. It was a landmark victory for international law and for the Philippines' dignity. But China dismissed the ruling as waste paper and doubled down on its activities. Artificial islands grew, military assets deployed, Filipino fishermen still harassed. The world applauded the legal win, but on the water nothing changed. The Philippines had the law, China had the ships. The gap between principle and power was stark. The struggle was far from over. The next move would test the nation's resolve. Just as the Philippines won at The Hague, a new president, Rodrigo Duterte, took office and changed course. He dismissed the ruling, seeking friendship with China in hopes of economic windfalls. Billions in Chinese investments were promised, and Duterte distanced the country from the US. For a moment, tensions eased. Some fishermen returned to Scarborough's outskirts, but most Chinese promises never materialized, and harassment at sea continued. The strategic cost of appeasement became clear. China's advances didn't stop, public backlash grew. The military and many officials were uneasy. Critics warned Duterte was trading sovereignty for empty promises. The gamble failed. The Philippines was more vulnerable, and resistance to China's influence intensified. The nation was ready for another dramatic shift. The search for real security resumed. The 2022 election of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. marked a sharp foreign policy reversal. Facing Chinese pressure and public anger, Marcos restored and deepened ties with the US. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, was revived, granting US access to more Philippine bases, especially near Taiwan and the Spratlys. These bases became strategic strongholds, signaling Manila's resolve. Beijing protested, but Manila and Washington focused on deterrence. High-level defense talks increased. The Philippine Coast Guard, with US support, began publicizing China's aggressive actions. Journalists documented confrontations, lasers, dangerous maneuvers, bringing global attention. The alliance was more than military. It was about transparency and credibility. The Philippines was no longer a passive bystander. The shield was stronger, the voice louder. The region was watching and recalibrating. The balance of power was shifting again. In April 2023, the largest ever Balikatan exercises showcased the renewed US-Philippine alliance. Over 17,000 troops trained together, including live-fire drills at sea, sinking a mock warship off Zambales, home to the embattled fishermen. The message was clear. The Allies were ready to defend Philippine sovereignty. Advanced US weapons, amphibious landings and joint operations demonstrated credible deterrence. Drills spanned from Luzon to Palawan, covering key choke points. The exercises were a dress rehearsal for real conflict, sending a warning to Beijing. Morale soared. The public saw proof they were not alone. The Mutual Defense Treaty was alive and real. The lions were back, showing their teeth. The power dynamic was shifting. Again, the Philippines was no longer isolated. The Philippines' bold stand has rippled across the Indo-Pacific, inspiring neighbors like Vietnam and Malaysia to push back against China. Manila now leads a regional push for sovereignty, forging new security ties with Australia, Japan, and Western powers. The Philippines has become a hub for multinational cooperation, a strategic anchor, not a weak link. China fears losing the Philippines because of its geography. It sits astride the first island chain, blocking China's navy from the Pacific. A pro-US Philippines is a barrier. A neutral one is a gateway. Its proximity to Taiwan makes it vital in any future conflict. If the Philippines falls into China's orbit, Beijing's ambitions grow. If it stands firm, China's strategy falters. The struggle for Asia's future is playing out in the West Philippine Sea. The Philippines is the linchpin. Losing it would cripple China's regional ambitions. The world's eyes are on these waters. The center of gravity in Asia is here, and the stakes have never been higher.